feel like I should say this because I say it in every episode. That is my favorite. It's actually not my favorite part because I do like the talking part better. But anyway, I love the music.
I was just thinking that the music's excellent.
I know, thanks. I can't take credit. My producer, Phil, actually picked that out.
Oh, that's awesome.
But I loved it, so that's what mattered. Starielle Hope, thank you for being here. I'm so happy to have you. So for the listeners out there, Starielle Hope is here in Studio 140. I'm so grateful that she actually drove up from San Francisco, right? Mm-hmm. But you live a little bit further, and we'll dive into that in a little bit. Starielle is an expert in sex, love, and relationships. She writes about intimacy and skills for deeper connection. Definitely something that we need to talk about here. I have done my own version of kind of a fun 2-part episode with some friends. And we were originally going to talk about just online dating. And then we dove in a little bit deeper, but not one of us is an expert in anything sex related, at least. So probably you'll have a lot to offer here. So thanks for being here. I'm happy to have been connected to you through a mutual friend. And then delighted to hear that you are from Sonoma, right? Or your parents live in Sonoma.
I am, yeah. Grew up in Sonoma.
Wow, that's great. I lived in Sonoma for 8 years, and I loved every second I was there. I will say I'm not sure that I would want to go back.
I hear you.
It feels, I have, most of my friends are still in Sonoma, so I'm careful about what I say. But honestly, I don't feel like I fit in. I feel like it's just a little bedroomy for me, small, and everybody knows everything about everything you're doing, which sometimes is an okay thing. Sometimes when you're going through a hard time, it's not ideal that you go into Sonoma Market and everybody's like, "Oh, hey, heard you're getting a divorce." And I'm like, yeah, it was in the Sonoma Index Tribune this afternoon.
Breaking news.
Yeah, breaking. How long have you been away from Sonoma?
I just want to say I love Sonoma. It's a absolutely really beautiful town. There's just something for me about having gone to middle school and high school there where I just feel like I've grown up and moved on to other things.
Yeah.
So I have nothing against Sonoma at all, and it's a wonderful place to go back and visit. But, I'm just really enjoying trying out other places. I lived there from when I was 11 or 12 through high school.
Wow.
Yeah.
And now you're in Joshua. Wait, where do you live?
Yeah, just outside of Joshua Tree.
Every time I say that, I think, no, wait a minute, I must have that wrong. Like, does anybody live there?
Totally. There is literally no other point in my life where I would have said, I lived in cities. I left Sonoma. I went to school in Boston. Then I lived in San Francisco. I lived in LA for a little while. I lived in New York even. There's no other point in my life where I would have said, oh yeah, pick me up and put me down in the absolute middle of nowhere. Until it was right.
And what drew you there?
So I had been looking for a place in nature that I could really focus on writing a book that I'm working on right now. And I ended up being connected to a really wonderful friend that I, of course, met at Burning Man, who was just putting together a private hot springs retreat center. So he lives there, he owns the property, and he really discovered the hot springs there and has built out an absolutely beautiful place. So I moved there to just help partner with him on it. And I'm living on the property and just supporting him with that project.
I grew up in Arizona. So there's a part of me that will always be a desert girl. I don't know that I would want to go back, although, having a retreat center there is perfect, right? Because it seems like why a lot of people go to the desert, to Palm Springs and Joshua Tree and Palm Desert, is to kind of, I don't know if it's more people go there to relax and do inner work and connect, or to party. Like, it feels like there's maybe not Joshua Tree, but at least Palm Springs and such. It feels like let's go to Palm Springs for the weekend and party our butts off. Yeah,
it's a bit of both for sure. I think it's also really interesting. It's kind of feels a little bit like the next frontier. I feel kind of like a Western frontier woman out there it's really the middle of nowhere, and you have to figure out everything, especially where I live, which is actually 30 minutes outside of Joshua Tree, 30 minutes closer to the middle of nowhere.
Great. It's even further out.
It's absolutely beautiful. It's even further out. And what's really interesting is as transportation becomes easier, right, we're going to see fully automated self-driving cars here pretty soon. And what I ultimately realized was I don't need to live in a city for my work. I spend a lot of time traveling to cities. I don't actually need to live in one. So what if every time I go home from traveling, I get to feel like I'm on vacation?
Yeah.
And with the ease of travel, I'm really wondering what that's going to do for us. How it's going to give an opportunity for people to move out of the cities and just have more flexibility.
That's a great perspective. I've been just recently. I've been visiting New York fairly often. I'm going again next week, actually, and love it. Absolutely love it. And my creative energy there is through the roof. In the last trip that I had, so much happened. It was such a wonderful trip and so much growth and connection and all of this. And I got home, and now you've seen Petaluma, right? It's beautiful. We live in a really beautiful area, close to Sonoma, wine country. Petaluma's got a nice little kind of edgy downtown area. I live, 4 blocks off of downtown, and I can walk, and it's great. But I came home from New York, and it was so hard to feel almost like I was walking through the mud. Everything was happening so quickly in New York, but for me, super creative, super great. I got home and I was like, oh my God, I just hit a brick wall. And I struggled for a couple of weeks, which has never happened to me before. But your perspective of like, maybe I can just reframe that to be like, look, you're going and you're traveling into bigger cities. I think it's probably going to happen more often for me now. Maybe I just look at the return home as like, oh, I live in vacation land. And
to each his own as well, right? There were different stages in my life when being in a city was absolutely the best thing for me. And there's this tension. I think it's really interesting that you mentioned creativity, because that's something I bring up a lot. There's this tension between when I'm around a lot of creative people, that can be really inspiring. Mm-hmm. I totally understand that experience. I've definitely had that experience. What I'm experiencing now, just for me personally, is I've started to get a lot more curious about the nervous system and what effect being in a city right now, just the state that I'm personally in right now, has on my nervous system. Because what we understand about the nervous system is that it is not up to date with our current human lifestyle, right? Our nervous system is still in the primal hunter-gatherer mode that we were in for most of the lives of human beings in our current form. And when we hear construction noises, when we hear traffic, we hear horns, we hear sirens, we hear people's dogs barking, all of those things, it makes sense that our nervous system could be perceiving those things as threats, because during most of the life of our nervous system, those things were potential threats that we needed to be tracking. And what I've personally discovered of being, as is already established, in the middle of nowhere, I feel so much more creativity. I feel so much more flow. I feel so much more inspiration. And my just gut instinct on this is that it really has to do with that when I'm tracking lots of things going on around me, that's taking up pieces of my energy. And when I don't have to track that, all of a sudden I have all this surge of energy that I didn't know was there.
That's great. Back, like I mentioned in New York, I felt like I was firing on all cylinders creatively. I had all of the ideas and it was all coming to me. My problem was I didn't have a net big enough to catch it all. So I was getting like downloads of ideas and this and that. And when I came back, in theory, what I should have done is maybe carved out a day or two where I was like, I just turned off all of the noise and thought, I just need to get everything out that's like swimming around in my head, put it down on paper, make some sense of it, maybe toss a few things out or whatever. And I didn't take that opportunity, which, you can if you're in a quieter space, right? Very interesting. This makes me want to ask a question. Before we came on the air, you were talking a little bit about your work and how you ended up in this space and your journey into what you're doing now with your work. There was a moment you were talking about, this is something I've been struggling with lately, is trying to get quiet with myself and sort out all the shit, whatever it is, like either learn more about myself or try and tap into what kind of feelings I'm having both physically and emotionally, maybe sort through some old, narratives that need some cleaning up or whatever. But right now it's very common for people, who have an expertise like you have, to offer some advice to somebody like myself and say, you need to get quiet, like sit, whatever it is, sit in a room, meditate, listen to your own voice, turn off all the noise. Yes, in theory, that's a great idea. How do you tell somebody like myself who doesn't have a volume button to turn off all the noise to do that? Because that's where a lot of the real work happens. And then that's where you can potentially tap into some of the things that you teach. So give me some advice on that. Like, is it literally just practice, or is there like a script?
Absolutely. Well, I would just want to say first that I think the example of your creativity flowing in a city and my creativity flowing in nature is such a beautiful example of the fact that different things work for different people. And so my first advice, I would never say I know the right thing for you to do. What I've found generally is I really love to share what has worked for me. And I think that there are a myriad of catalysts out there. I think of all these things as catalysts: meditation, breath work, if it's plant medicine is your thing. All of these things are different catalysts. And I feel that when people hear other people sharing their own experience, they can just feel, oh, that thing sounds really interesting. That thing sounds really interesting. And that's a beautiful guide from your own body telling you a direction that could be supportive or could be powerful for you. I've really made the mistake in the past of chasing after an experience because I thought I should do it or I wanted to have the experience, and not because it was something that necessarily I felt called to. It's taken a little while for me to actually hone the distinction between that, because I've always been somebody who loves to try new things and try new experiences. And I've really been trying to tune into that more lately of, wow, what's the difference between hearing somebody's story and hearing that's really interesting, and hearing somebody's story and hearing, wow, I feel something in my physical body that makes me want to move towards that thing, instead of my rational mind telling me like, oh, gee, I should be doing something. I need to fix myself. This thing fixed this other person, so maybe I'll go there and it will work for me. Does that make sense, that there's a difference in that energy? And so what that brings me to is this experience of, how did I actually learn to discern the difference? And how did I learn to tune into my physical body? Because I'm somebody who definitely grew up academic, in my logical, rational mind, always thinking that was the best way to go. And I think it can be a great way to go in a lot of areas, but ultimately, don't we want to have as many tools at our disposal as possible? And a big part of my discovery over the last decade has been how I can merge these intuitive feeling tools of my physical body and my intuition and my emotional body with my rational logical mind, to be able to intentionally choose on that spectrum what's going to serve me best in any given moment.
Totally makes sense. I think, I talk about the noise a lot, and I think it's probably because it's a lesson that I'm in the middle of trying to learn. I'm more intentional about it now, but I think this is a challenge that I've had quite often in my life, probably most of my life. And I mentioned off air a little bit about how I've been reading and discovering and trying to learn a little bit more about manifesting and kind of energies that create those manifestations and such. And I keep having this same challenge. It's, again, maybe it's because I need a script, or I feel like I need a script, but I go from a lifetime of not feeling my feelings, because it's easier just to ignore them. And then you get in this habit of just not even noticing them, and you power through. For me, my life has been a series of uncomfortable moments that I've just powered through. And eventually, that catches up with you. And it's usually 3 years later or 2 years later. And now you don't even know how to